Welcome to Literacy Mindset, where education leaders from across the country share strategies for improving K-12 instruction today and preparing for the challenges of tomorrow. The stakes are high. Students are facing new academic demands, and educators are navigating an ever-changing educational landscape. Each episode, we explore the most effective literacy initiatives, innovative tools, and strategies that are reshaping education. Whether you're an educator looking to improve student outcomes or passionate about driving meaningful change in schools, the Literacy Mindset brings you the insights and strategies you need to stay ahead. This is where education leadership meets real-world impact.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Really excited for another episode of the Literacy Mindset. My guest today, Mr. Kristopher Macias, who is the Director of Instruction and Professional Learning at the Highlands Community Charter and Technical Schools. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, really looking forward to the conversation today. You're going to be able to provide some unique insights on the things that Highlands has going on, a unique perspective on it. So maybe why don't we start first, give us a little background on you and kind of how you came into the role that you're in today.
Absolutely. So I started off as a teacher, as most, I think, administrators tend to be,
right.
Primarily as a single subject English teacher in Title I schools. I started mostly in the Bay Area, where I was born and raised. I eventually transitioned up here to Sacramento, doing some opportunities more so around coaching and getting more on the academic coaching side of things, like getting a little closer to the administrative components. And inevitably, after about 8 or 9 years of classroom instruction, I was able to move forward into becoming an administrator here for Highlands as a principal first for about 1 year, and inevitably was promoted to this role as the director of instruction.
Excellent. Okay, so background in teaching English, mostly at the secondary level. We're going to get into that because you gave me some insights earlier that I want to talk about on that. Okay, so now tell us a little bit about Highlands. Now that you're here in this role, it's a unique district with some unique components. So why don't you give us some insight into that?
Absolutely. So, your typical high school, for the most part, of course, is looking at students that are 18 and under. And of course, with that, a little bit of extra time potentially for, some continuation or extra as needed. But for us, we actually have a student population that begins at the age of 22 and continues forward from there. So there's no age cap necessarily. Reason being is that we noticed at the inception of this organization and our school overall, that there was this very, very large gap for our students' parents, primarily. The population of students and, primarily immigrants, who makes up a vast majority of our students currently, who were not being served by really any institution. Of course, there are community colleges. There are spaces for them to potentially continue their education, especially if they had education prior, but not necessarily starting from the fundamentals. And specific, of course, to the context of this podcast and with literacy in mind, that's where we begin. We start off our students with acquiring the language of English and also maintaining their home language. Biliteracy is really important for us here as well, in order to integrate them into the culture of the United States, the culture of academics within this space as well, in California specifically, in Sacramento even more specifically, but wanting, of course, for them to be able to move forward to acquire their high school diploma, knowing that opens up opportunities for them to move forward. We are a WIOA school, so we do focus primarily on workforce preparation and readiness in that regard. We have a robust CTE program to accompany that. But of course, we also understand that many of our students may want to, especially if they were perhaps educated in their own home countries, continue on with that similar career path. And this is just that one access point that is a necessity for them to enter higher education in the United States.
Okay. That is fascinating. I think it's going to give us some interesting things to talk about, especially as it relates to traditional intervention and how you go about thinking about maybe gaps and closing those gaps. But let's take a second and talk about your background, thinking you're going to be a high school English teacher. You get hired and you jump right in. And what's your first thing that you do actually?
Yeah, so it's kind of an odd experience. My first year, like with most single subject credentialed candidates at that point, before you get your preliminary credential, you do have to do student teaching. So I did the traditional student teaching in San Ramon to start with. Great experience, 2 periods a day while I still was, of course, taking classes in the meantime. But as I got to that second component or that second part of our credentialing program, that's where money started to become a factor for me. And I was like, well, I need to get a job as a part of this. Is that a possibility? I spoke with my professors, and sure enough, we were able to find a district that allowed me to intern. So I was teacher of record full time, but at the same time, still had the availability to go to classes at night to complete my preliminary credential. At the time, of course, when I interviewed, English teacher, that was my training. That's what I'm here for. Right. They were like, great, fantastic. Come join us as an English teacher. And that's what I signed up for. And on my drive home, I get the insight saying, well, really, we want you to actually teach ELD. Are you comfortable with that? And at that point, I'm already looped in. This is a pretty unique opportunity. So let's go ahead and do it. And I don't find out until shortly afterwards that I'm also going to be the co-department of the ELD department, or the department chair, I should say, for the ELD department, which was another little surprise for my first year of teaching, but helped me to rise to the occasion and understand what are the, the requirements within the classroom. What does that look like, of course, but also on a slightly more administrative side as a department chair, what do I need to do to help to organize not only myself, but a team of 5-6 teachers that are teaching similar subjects. Right.
Well, and so ELD in this case is English language development, right? So you're focusing on students in this case that are acquiring the English language, don't yet have proficiency in it, maybe similar to a K-5 grade level understanding of the English language, likely, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had an English 1 or ELD 1 class, which is in that case the lowest level for ELD, where I believe at the time 8 different languages were spoken in the classroom, other than English, of course. So again, needing to navigate that space, and obviously this large language barrier between myself and my students, and being able to bring them up to the fundamentals of understanding the basics of literacy, going over phonemes, going over CVC words, these types of things, all the way up to our ELD 4 students, which did have sort of a dual immersion component to their day, where they were in my ELD class for support, but were also integrated into a mainstream English class simultaneously, which gave us a lot of content, of course, to help them, writing with their essays and preparing for presentations and things that they needed that extra support in specifically. So really taught the whole range in that first year.
Got it. Which is probably not exactly what the mainstay of your curriculum when you were studying to be a secondary English teacher. And so what are some things that you learned during that time about language and its relationship with literacy? If we think about literacy being maybe a fluent, comprehending reader on that, but maybe the components of foundational literacy skills that are required in language. Maybe walk us through some of those things.
Yeah, so I would say that at the lowest level for ELD 1 students, really was the rationale for me of understanding that some of them were coming in with, of course, being literate in their home language, not always necessarily, but it hadn't necessarily occurred to me at the time that I'm thinking I'm going to be teaching Shakespeare and The Great Gatsby and other more traditional English texts, you may say, and the subject of English, that I would even have to teach them at the base level of understanding the conversion between their alphabet and the English alphabet. Something as simple as that, let alone getting into the components of pronunciation. And this is where I found that it was really helpful to lean into the culture of the variety of cultures, I should say, that were present in my classroom. It came up a lot where we were looking at cognates, the similar sounding words between languages, and even using that as an access point to be able to determine more complex language. I had a lot of Spanish speakers at the time while I was teaching in Richmond. I remember one particular instance where we were looking at the word incarnate, and some folks were struggling with the word, didn't understand it completely. And then we broke it apart. Like, where are my Spanish speakers? Gotta tell me what that word means. And like meat, it's like, yeah, it means in flesh, like in meat. And that language access point we used as a springboard for their understanding and not as a limitation. I do continue not only in my role now, but also in my role as a teacher, promoting biliteracy. I do want my students to have an opportunity to maintain their home languages and not feel like they need to lose that. But in actuality, it is a benefit to be bilingual at the end of their educations.
Yeah. What are the things that you feel like you have to do to make sure that can be true? Biliteracy, are there extra efforts that you have to make happen? How is it difficult? Because English is such a predominant language that we think about. What are some of the unique challenges?
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that came up a lot, especially again in the high school classrooms and to a degree now as well, was being able to get students to understand the difference between translation and interpretation. That was the biggest one. I am a registered community interpreter for Spanish particularly. So, I am trained to look at that, and again, that very specific lens of either one-for-one translation or providing the interpretation of what's being shared linguistically from party to party. And that was something I emphasized in my classrooms as well. So students would have, let's say, a notebook, for example. Here's the word in English. Here's the word in my language. And then the third column to do these necessarily line up in this context. And that extra contextual component was really helpful for them as they began to explore the different variable uses of language. We had a lesson that comes to mind on the word cold. And like, how many different ways can I use the word cold? Like, well, sure, temperature, fine, but I could also treat someone in a cold manner. I could have, many of them were into hip hop at the time, cold as an expression of the confidence essentially that a person has when, rapping or spitting a freestyle, right? Having a cold demeanor essentially. And it's slightly different. And those tangential meanings and those extra contextualized meanings really did help for my students to not only understand the language in more depth, but also to relate it back to perhaps even the third or fourth word in their home languages to really bring out the meaning of what they're trying to convey. And that was always at the focal point of my English classes, whether ELD or more traditional English as a subject, was really, what am I attempting to communicate, and how do I craft my language in a way that is going to allow me the best access into that person's mind? That's really the perspective that I like for my students to take at the end of any lesson.
Got it. How do you individualize instruction at the level, maybe when you're thinking about biliteracy as a focal point? One of the challenges today, I'm sure, in these high classroom teacher or student ratios, like how do you individualize instruction so that it can be unique enough to someone that understands cold in a hip hop context and someone who doesn't? Walk me through how you guys think about individualization.
Yeah, so at least in my current district here at Highlands, we do that in a variety of ways. I would say that primarily we lean into technology as one of those components.
Okay.
We do have our students have a one-to-one access to technology. In this case, not only Chromebooks in the classroom when necessary, of course, to get the digital literacy components of typing on a keyboard and utilizing that system, you may say, of technology, but also utilizing cell phones. In this case, Google Pixel Folds, which we also issue to our students, and that gives them really a variety of different potential opportunities here to be able to use the Google Translate feature on there that is actually dual screened between you and your partner to be able to communicate with somebody who speaks a totally different language than you and be able to share in communication, again, preserving some of the unique languages that the students speak, but then simultaneously giving them an understanding of how they can reach one another and be able to bridge those gaps through communication, utilizing English as that center point. Now that we've had this conversation, let's bring that back again to the English translation or interpretation, of course, depending, and be able to then examine that in a deeper context now that they've had, again, exposure and a maintenance of their home language as well.
Right. Okay. No, that's interesting. I'm interested to know how you guys think about tools that are out there. Clearly, we think a lot about software tools from the Mindplay side of things. But usually when you're dealing with initial blends and sounds and just the foundational skills, you're usually thinking about it through the lens of a young person, right? Mm-hmm. 5 to 8 years old is probably the sweet spot on that. So now you're talking about a 22, 23, maybe 30 plus. You said there is no age cap here. Mm-hmm. And it's possible that the exact same phoneme sounds and blends are required. What do you find are there good tools out there to use? Do you have to do a lot of stuff in-house because there's not a lot of good tools because most people are focused on the young student? Kind of walk me through how you guys think about that, because it's such a unique situation in Highlands.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we do have to have a very keen understanding of the separation between pedagogy and andragogy. And we know that our students are coming in as adults, again, 22. Some of our students are, in their 60s, 70s, even as well, have lived full and complete lives with a plethora of experiences, especially if they are recent immigrants from their home countries and may have many of them do, advanced degrees. We have some students that are structural engineers from their home country and are now coming to learn the language. And it's really an approach that we take but the respect of who is in the room. We understand that they know, of course, in their home language, how to communicate to the extent usually verbally to start with, if right. In some occasions, and not always necessarily, through writing as well. That's another kind of fundamental piece that many of our students sometimes have not experienced school in their home country, on the opposite end of our structural engineers, as I just described. Right. And being able to provide them with that support in a way that, yes, goes over the material, but two, also doesn't bring it to somewhat of a juvenile sense where they're feeling as if, again, this is meant for second graders. This is something that my child is experiencing currently in their third grade class. And suddenly that's what I'm doing here. We're very intentional about that and making sure that we're respecting the student, respecting, that they are an adult, but at the same time, taking the time to go over those fundamentals. And really it's a classroom culture thing more than anything else, where we need to spend time very intentionally with our students to bring them, in a sense, back to that state of childhood. And I say that intentionally here because oftentimes you'll notice a child who is, being, my son as an example, being raised in a bilingual household, is learning both simultaneously and could care less about making mistakes, is right. willing to stumble through language, no problem, until eventually he's mimicking the sounds in either language as, my wife and I are communicating with him. In a way, we need to bring our students back to that, to be able to make them feel comfortable in the space enough to lean into the mistake, and then provide them with that gentle correction in a way that, again, allows them to access the language and pronounce the words correctly, to enunciate in the way that we are expecting. And of course, we do use some softwares to assist with that. We do use things like Burlington English, ABC English as another component of that on the lower levels, to provide them with more structure and a little bit more individualization, depending on what they may need to focus on, let alone, of course, worksheets and things of that sort that we would be using for regular classroom instruction. So it's a combination, I would say, of the two, but it's really about the mindset more than anything else of getting them into that place of vulnerability and comfort simultaneously.
Okay. That's really good. I like that. A traditional K-12 classroom or district might think of a multi-tier system of support as a framework, MTSS or RTI as a framework for intervention. But that sort of supposes that there's a certain percentage that are tier one are kind of going to be coming along here. How do you guys think about intervention in the context of maybe every one of your students at some level is coming as an intervention? That's why they're enrolled in the first place. I don't know. Does that make sense? How do you guys think about that?
Well, I would say that in general, and again, I'm hoping that I'm answering this question in the way that you're asking here. It's more so that when we're thinking about our students, we are first interested in the kind of raw placement as the first aspect. So as they're integrating or enrolling, I should say, into our schools, we are looking at placing them, utilizing a variety of different testing measures, CASAS tests, things of that nature, in order to be able to provide a really accurate understanding of what level, according to our leveling system here, and soon to be in alignment with even NRS levels, how can we fit them into these categories in order to be able to give them the most appropriate approach? That is not necessarily in that moment taking in the full depth of context, of course, of that student. As I mentioned, many of them have long careers, life experiences, these sorts of things, but it's just looking at it from the lens of literacy primarily. And now that we've been able to place them within these categories, now we're able to give them more specific intervention at the level that they have tested at, knowing that they are able to, of course, progress as they go along the system and eventually reach our high school components, which are more traditional in that sense, where they do cover economics, they do cover American history, they do cover English and as a subject as opposed to as the ELD language acquisition components. So again, we do scale it in that way in order to provide very intentional support for our students in that way.
Got it. I have a question that may feel like I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm not thinking about it that way. But I'm interested to know, as we've been talking here, when you have had so much experience now and exposure to language learners amongst many different languages, if you were to try and think about the foundational skills that are the building blocks for literacy, have you been able to identify a common theme or thread inside of the foundational skills that maybe challenge language learners more than other foundational skills? You see what I'm saying? Is it phonics sometimes more than not? Is it phonological awareness? Is it, no, they can pick up sounds quick because they have already the construct of sounds in another language, but comprehension is always a barrier. Is there something that you've identified, or is it just too different depending on the student?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I would say that it does have, of course, a degree of variability between student to student, and especially as I'm thinking at it from the lens of if we have, again, a common alphabet, that usually is a big leg up for many of those students, and be able to kind of scale them in a different sense than others who are having to learn that fundamental difference. But this is where we do tend to lean into, again, the classroom experience, and the HCCS side of our organization is all seat-based. We do very much lean into the classroom experience insofar as, again, the exposure to sound of language and, sight of words and those more physical components of literacy, which there is, of course, an independent study model that we do have as part of our organization. And again, it's very similar as far as our curriculum overall. But what we do tend to lean into on the seat-based side is, again, that in-classroom exposure in a way that is somewhat more communal. It is a little bit more perhaps visceral for the student and being able to engage in a physical sense. And we find that that's, again, immensely helpful as far as the base level language acquisition. Independent study absolutely has its place, and they do a wonderful job on the SIGA side of our house, of course. But primarily, that tends to focus more so on the upper level of our students, where they can engage more independently, asynchronously with some of their work, as opposed to, again, language acquisition, which very much has to be in person. It takes a very, very different set of skills to be able to bring someone up and notice the subtleties of their responses to how I'm engaging with them, to understand, is it a comprehension concern? Is it a fear of pronunciation concern that I'm noticing here? And be able to engage with them, again, one-to-one and person-to-person.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like that there's a higher level of reluctancy? You described the household that your son will be free to make mistakes. And as we get older, sometimes we get more shy or more nervous about making those mistakes. So I'm assuming that the reluctancy is high amongst your student population. And you're suggesting that the in-person component goes a huge way to help bring that barrier down. Is that a fair way of characterizing it?
Absolutely. And I would say that it's a combination of two things, which is us being very intentional with our curricular approach and what, of course, we're asking for students to do at the appropriate level. But of course, all credit to our instructors, our teachers, the educators in the classroom are the ones who are able to, again, bridge that gap between vulnerability that is necessary for those mistakes to be made, but also the confidence in knowing that this is not something that you're going to be publicly scrutinized or penalized for in some way. It is a part of that learning process. And our educators, you will be hard pressed to find a more passionate group, knowing that they are working primarily, again, with this population, and they are incredibly, incredibly intentional about building a sense of comfort in that classroom for their students, especially at those lower levels, of course, throughout, but primarily in that section, because it is so incredibly needed in order for our students to feel that they can, engage, they can raise a hand and try something new, especially as an adult, where we have very much formed in the social sense those barriers, we may say, between my feeling of comfort and not wanting to be embarrassed in a social setting, let alone being brand new to the country and not knowing what's acceptable or even worthy of embarrassment in some ways. These are all things that we're building into the intentionality of our instruction to fully acclimate our students, not just in the literacy sense in the traditional way, but in the social literacy components, the digital literacy components. So there's, again, really, in respect to our educators here, they are very, very, very intentional about that process.
That's great. So does a profile of a teacher look the same for you as a traditional K-12, or do you have other criteria that you look for as you think about someone that can carry that culture?
Yeah, I would say, I've been on hiring committees for your typical K through 12 schools, primarily high school, and also, of course, for hiring our teachers now. I'd say there's definitely a lot of overlap, of course, some of the fundamentals of classroom management and, lesson planning, these types of things that are very essential at this level. But we are very much looking for teachers that have that intentional practice of working with EL students. And then you add on top of that component of adults. This is, such a unique environment for to put it simply here, a room full of students who are not compelled to be there by law, but are socially compelled to participate in their education. It is a drastically different experience for our teachers, and we are looking for people to lean into that experience, knowing that perhaps many of them have gone to or been teaching at elementary schools or public high schools for a duration of years. And that's always the struggle, is that how do I get my students to focus? How do I get my students to pay attention? How do I keep them, or keep them engaged throughout the class?
Management, right.
Of course. And these are, of course, still fundamental here as well. But again, the real difference between those classrooms and ours is our students are going out of their way to be here. They are, they have literally left their home countries to be here and have now found us. They are traveling far and wide. We're, breaking down those barriers by providing them, bus passes and things of that sort. So, if they don't have cars, they can get to us. But in either case, they are extremely intentional about making it to that seat. And those teachers feel that, and that gratitude of knowing that we are giving them something that otherwise they would not generally have access to, knowing that many, if any other organizations serve this population of students so intentionally. So it's a drastic shift, and very much something that I'm looking for as I'm interviewing new teachers. Do they have that motivation in mind, that we are serving this unique population, and your classroom experience will feel and look different, and we expect to see you manifest that through your instruction. And we want to see you take advantage of that in a very positive way.
Got it. Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, you are a community of technical schools, so therefore technical things likely are your wheelhouse, which probably means that you don't have nearly the same challenges of implementing technology in your schools as the traditional K-12. I'm sure everything goes smoothly for you guys.
I'd say smoother than in most places that I've been, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And like with anything, of course, technology, always has its ups and downs, the ebb and flow. You can have all the tech in the room, but if the internet goes out, and that's just our service providers, not much we can do about that. Of course, we are also even very intentional about that. We have a robust IT team and digital navigators teams as well that will come out to sites and be able to troubleshoot immediately. We do have a variety of sites, which is something I have not mentioned, throughout Sacramento, really as far as Yuba City and as far south as Oxnard. So as you can imagine, we need, a pretty robust team to be able to help with the infrastructure of our technology. Right. Not only the troubleshooting of things like internet failures or connectivity concerns, but also implementation. Being able to teach our teachers and to teach our students how to utilize the new platforms that we offer, and being able to keep up with the new age of technology, we'll say, especially as we're now in considerations of AI and ways to use that equitably within our district.
Got it. Are there things that you see or have noticed that you would say to, people like me or my counterparts that are building software to try and help your life be better and easier, that you would say, yeah, here's something that would be great if you guys could do better, or anything that you've noticed along those lines?
I would say that the technology that is out now is so drastically different than it was when I started teaching 10 years ago. The difference in, I give AI as a simple example of,
Sure.
Man, I wish I had that during grad school. But some of that, of course. But I would say that one of the things I've touched on already that I've yet to really see fully integrated into an application or a software is that third column that I was describing, that extra contextual piece that really helps our students to maintain a biliterate perspective. Mm-hmm. I find that many cases, Duolingo as a simple example of that, we'll give you the one-to-one translation. We'll assist you with, building your vocabulary, of course, and that's all fundamental. That absolutely has its place. But where is that third category? Where is that extra space that really helps a student to understand the social context of how that language is being used, how it connects more adequately and more specifically in interpretation into their home language, and being able to focus on that middle ground so they have a greater utility for the language ultimately. I feel like we tend to lean into, again, the one-to-one expectation of this word means this, and the student goes to use it in the context that they're used to for the translated version of that word in their home language, and it presents very, very oddly in the other language, whether that's English or their home language, and vice versa. But finding that middle ground, and again, an intentional application or software to really help students hone in on what is the gray area of language, and how is idiomatic language translated or interpreted between languages, and how can I use that fluently and effectively as much as more standard vocabulary, would be something I would love to see. And I can certainly see our students would benefit from that here at Highlands as well.
Okay. Well, man, this has been great, Chris. I appreciate the time. I feel like we need to have a whole different amount of time to talk about the differences between pedagogy and andragogy and all of the things that could go down there. But we'll end today with usually what is my final question. I love people pulling out their crystal balls and talking to us a little bit about the future. You have a unique perspective, of course, in the way that it looks, and technologically you might offer up a perspective. But as you just think about literacy now from a K-12 in a grade level sense, but a 5 to whatever age sense, are there things that are happening today that you think they're not going to change? They shouldn't change. They're fantastic. That's great. And the converse would be, what are some things that maybe need to change to get better in the future?
I'd say something that I would like to see more of in the future. We'll perhaps start with that. I would really like to see us, not only my organization, but any organization and academics in particular, to lean into the real potential of AI as a means of individualizing instruction. I see that as such a valuable tool to be able to have character conversations with ChatGPT. And you're Mercutio, I'm Romeo, and we're having a conversation, really developing context here, let alone for translation or interpretation purposes as well, how critical that can be to be able to provide very, very specific feedback to that individual student and generate an interest in learning independently. And I don't mean that necessarily separate completely from the classroom in a traditional IS platform, but more so that extra layer of learning that we all have to do in order to really adhere to any discipline. It's not just going to happen within the bell to bell. That is the fundamental, of course, but we know we need to practice. Students who go home and engage in that language that they're learning with their families tend to increase their learning drastically for those that don't, that limit their practice to just, again, the bell to bell instruction. So I would love to see that, again, we lean more into technology as a means of generating that interest and providing that accessibility for our students. What I would say that I would like to continue to maintain is really the culture of literacy, which we've done a great job here at Highlands to produce, which is, again, being able to provide students with access to literature. We are partnered with Reading with Relevance, and shout out to them. They have been great partners in our pursuit of being able to promote literacy throughout our district, and doing something that it may seem subtle, but is so incredibly important that I wish I had as a traditional English teacher, being able to provide our students with a copy of a book that they get to keep. Something as simple as that really just promotes this idea of, like, I have this book with me now. I'm carrying it with me. I'm on the bus traveling from space to space. And, I'm going to go ahead and take out that book and engage in the culture of literacy. And that's something that, as I mentioned, that we've done a great job here at Highlands. And I certainly see it at other campuses as well. So across the board for education, just really wanting to maintain the book culture ultimately, and being able to see that as an alternative, hopefully, to the doom scrolling of looking through our phones. Being able to see that more often would be great. Yeah.
Okay. I love that. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you for taking time and spending time with us and talking about the great things you have going on at Highlands. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again someday soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you again for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found today's conversation insightful, be sure to subscribe to Literacy Mindset. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for updates, resources, and to join the conversation. Have a topic you'd like us to explore? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.